And hello and welcome to the France 24 debate. I'm Annette Young, filling in for Francois Picard. This Monday, the US and Ukraine pressed on with talks in Switzerland to come up with a mutually acceptable peace plan. This after agreeing to modify a US proposal that Kyiv and its European allies saw as a Kremlin wish list. The 28-point draft plan, including several long-standing Russian demands, crossing Kyiv's established red lines and overlooking key European security concerns. American officials, however, characterising the proposal as a work in progress. Karis Garland has more.
A refined peace framework. That's how delegations from Kyiv and Washington described an updated proposal to end Russia's war in Ukraine. Negotiators met in Geneva on Sunday to discuss a 28-point plan presented by the US last week, but which Ukraine and its European allies saw as a Kremlin wish list. President Volodymyr Zelensky welcomed the progress, but remained cautious.
We've managed to keep extremely sensitive points on the table, including the full release of all Ukrainian prisoners of war. These are important steps, but to achieve real peace, more is needed.
The original plan would require Kyiv to cede more territory, reduce the size of its military, and would bar the country from joining NATO, conditions Ukraine has long rejected. Blindsided by the US move, France, Germany and the UK drew up a counter-proposal. It would allow Ukraine to have up to 800,000 troops in peacetime instead of the US plan's cap of 600,000. And it says talks on territorial swaps would start from the current front line, not assuming in advance, as the US version does, that some areas are already Russian. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said US President Donald Trump had expressed an openness to a jointly developed peace plan for Ukraine.
It's important to us that there can be no peace plan for Ukraine if we do not give our consent to issues that affect European interests and European sovereignty.
Russia, though, has slammed the European version. A Kremlin foreign policy aide said the proposal was, at first glance, completely unconstructive and didn't work for Russia.
So the pressure is on. Is this plan the basis for a genuine peace deal or destined for failure? With me to discuss this is Christine Duguin-Clément, a specialist on Eastern Europe and a researcher at the Paris Première Panthéon-Sorbonne University. André Dietrich, a senior analyst with the European Union Institute for Security Studies. From Kyiv, Lisa Yasko, a Ukrainian MP. And from Cambridge in Massachusetts, Mariana Buterin from the Centre for Nuclear Security Policy at MIT. I want to thank all of you for giving me some of your time. Firstly, before we break it down in parts, I want to ask all of my panellists, and I'm going to start with you, Mariana, in Massachusetts. Do you think this US plan could truly be the basis for a legitimate peace agreement?
The U.S. plan of the 28 points, which is essentially a Russian plan, right, even judging from the language that was used from the formulation, served, I suppose, to begin this conversation and to create a certain sense of urgency with all negotiators. All negotiators know that having a certain deadline or creating a sense of urgency is important to get things moving. However, on the substantive level, certainly, certain provisions there were not controversial, such as Ukraine remaining in the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, abiding by those provisions and continuing its path towards the EU. Those provisions were not controversial. But other demands were clearly, as you have remarked, a Russian wish list. Whether that could, that was certainly a non-starter and a red flag for the Ukrainian side. The question remains, can the Russian side use the 28-point plan as the beginning, not the definite list of their demands? So the beginning for conversation and negotiations, that is yet to be seen.
André, do you think it's just a stunt by Washington, or do you think there's something in this which, as Mariana just said, could form the basis for a substantive peace agreement?
Oh no, I don't think it's a stunt. It is a basis. I think it responds to the long-term interest by the U.S. administration to reach a peace deal with Russia and to just disengage from this conflict. Yes, I mean it has been referred to this original 28-point plan as a Russian wish list, but it's fair to say that there are also points that might not necessarily be palatable to Russia. You know, the cap on the army size. I mean, we can debate 600,000 as it appears to have been included in the original plan. You know, for peacetime force may not be so low, but then there was also this issue, perhaps less controversially for us, more controversially for Russia, of security guarantees, right? This kind of contradiction regarding the de facto recognition, whatever that is supposed to mean, of the territories supposedly to be ceded to Russia. So, you know, Yuri Yushakov went before the Russian media today and then said that, well, Russians like the original 28-point plan better than this corrected one by Europeans and Ukrainians that is apparently now to be discussed. You know, between Ukraine and the US, potentially the presidents as well. But I think that there are also issues with the original plan that Russians might not necessarily like very much.
Christine, your thoughts?
In my opinion, let's be clear, that's a Dmitriev plans that is backed up. And let's be clear, the first original 28 points, it is just giving Russia the opportunity to launch all the goals of the military special operation. And I think that if ever we think, and we are tempted to think, that maybe Russia is making some concession in that plan, that's just a trick. I think we've got to be very clear on that. And even for some points, if we are talking about the payoffs of the frozen asset abroad, that could be like a win-win interest. But just be clear and just be realistic. It's a one-side point. And just give us very quick and simple examples. They are saying that Ukraine must not strike Russian cities at Moscow and St. Petersburg, but there is no such a prohibition on the Russian side, on Kyiv, on Ukrainian cities. So let's be clear, it's just a one-side thing. It is like retaken what have been discussed, if we can say discuss, in Alaska. And I think that the interesting thing is that European Union have to make a change on that. And, you know, it's like in this kind of fairy tales when you've got all these nasty witches that gives on the baby, when the baby is born, that give like nasty gifts. And the European Union have to be very careful and to come and to be realistic and to manage not to let Russia keep his goals, because it is capitulation at no, and it is even very dangerous because it is asking to European Union and to other countries, non-Ukrainian governments, to access to their own volunteers, to their own goals. Even it is putting in danger the security architecture for European unions.
I want to bring in at this point Lisa Yasko, an Ukrainian MP from Kyiv. Lisa, what's been the reaction where you are to what has been proposed in this peace plan?
Well, it was a big shock for us in the beginning, especially because it sounded as an absolute Russian plan, which sounded very insulting to all of us, to all Ukrainians. I keep telling that accepting such a plan for us would be a real historical suicide. We cannot afford that. I just want to remind that this full-scale invasion and the war didn't start 4 years ago. It started in 2014, and there were also many moments in our history when Russia was trying to get rid of our people, to have a genocide against Ukrainian people. So this is the demand for justice is a demand for generations of Ukrainians. And this plan looked and sounded as just the Russian, almost perfect version of victory. And this is very sad that US supported this plan. But I really hope, and I know that it will not be signed in the way how it was presented in the beginning.
Mariana, I want to ask you, the reality is in the last 24, 36 hours, we've had a lot of speculation in media outlets what this peace plan actually involves and includes. The same thing with the European counter-proposal, because the reality is we still don't know exactly what exactly is in the plan, do we?
Well, exactly. We know we've all read the 28 peace plan, the Dmitriev plan. We read the European counter proposal, but we don't know exactly what the outcome of this latest round of negotiations in Geneva had been. We do know very well which points of the original 28 point plan are absolutely unacceptable to Ukraine, and as has been remarked, also unacceptable to Europe. Limiting the purview of the NATO alliance to invite members in any kind of legally binding format, as has been included in the I should just call it the Russian plan, right? Dressed as an American proposal, it goes beyond Ukraine, right? It goes to the very security architecture of Europe, as we have remarked. Also, the swap of the land swaps and the evacuation by Ukrainian or retreat by Ukrainian forces from some of the areas that are not currently occupied by the Russian forces. In addition, all of this language about denazifying and the rights of the Russian speakers in Ukraine, all of that is a kind of veil that covers Russia's kind of sub-conventional means to influence Ukraine in the future, right, through influence operations, through, again, penetration into Ukrainian internal politics. Ukrainians have learned a very, very hard lesson in trying to kind of accommodate these liberal-sounding, policies where they are being manipulated on the other side. So I think there will be a lot of attention to any illusion of, kind of the rights of specifically Russian speakers, as opposed to the European plan that refers to EU policies on national and religious and linguistic minorities. So there's certainly a lot of room in between, this Russian position and the Ukrainian position. But let me just draw attention to the very concept of this plan, right? It looks that what the parties are negotiating about is the extent to which Ukraine will be restrained. Right, in the European version, Ukraine will be restrained less. It will have a bigger military in peacetime. It will have, maybe not as punishing a set of conditions and concessions as in the original 28-point plan. But still, conceptually, it is Ukraine that undertakes restraint, a country that has been the victim of aggression. So we're not restraining the aggressor, we are restraining the victim. And the question becomes, to what extent? And I think this is actually a really important point, not just for Ukrainian security going forward, but for entire international order. What do we do with the system we created after the last, major European and world war in 1945? How do we deal with a situation where the aggressor seems to go unpunished?
Mariana,
these are the very big questions that will need to be addressed.
Mariana, Christine wants to add something to what you're just saying.
In line with what I've just been said, Russia is not interested in peace, in real peace, as we conceptualized it, and that for different reasons, and some are very pragmatic. First, if ever you've got like a robust peace agreement and treatment, first, all the soldiers have to go back home. But Russia just put off all the psychiatric cares for soldiers. And you've got a lot of PTSD who are going to come back at home, and it will improve all the domestic and social files of violence. Secondly, if ever you go on a real peace, you've got to make a real big change into the Russian economies that have been already shook once in order to go into the war effort, in order to sustain it. So you've got to make a second shock to this. Additionally, if we've got a peace at no, they didn't get their goal on the special operation. So even on all these points, they have no interest. And maybe a last one, last but not least, if ever you are in a peacetime, whatever, the occupied territories that are actually under a military force and governance, they go in civilian governance. And what if ever the population go into the streets and go protest and make some riots just in order to say that they are not as happy as that of being Russia? The thing is, as Russia is pushing the idea that they are the best regime ever by opposition to Western countries, if ever you can show that people that they saved are not comfortable with that, it is also an ideological problem. So they have no interest on war. And especially, let's be clear, their own interest is to push a little further.
Andrei, I want to talk to you about this. I mean, the Russians were not there in Geneva this weekend. So how much of this plan do you think was indeed drafted by Moscow, as so many claim?
I think it is fair to assume that it was a Russian hand that wrote the proposal. That the language analysis, Russian speakers, yes, that there are clear signs. I said before that I don't think that all the points in the original 28-point plan are necessarily Russia wishes, but it's also very clear that that plan reflects long-standing maximalist demands by Russia on denazification, quote, unquote, territorial concession, demilitarization. Yes, safety guarantees, but Russians have very different, security guarantees have a very different idea about what these might be. Fair enough. And I also agree that this original framework, 28-point, would hardly serve as a basis for lasting and just peace. And for any peace to be sustainable and last, it has to have an element of justice in it as well. That being said, we are also a little bit further down the road, and we are now at 19 points, and apparently, from what we gather from press reports, the talks in Geneva may have started a little bit with certain difficulties, but and ended up fairly well, according to the accounts that we have. And I would also like to point out one thing. The very reason why we are talking about these frameworks, evolving frameworks, is that this original framework was leaked. Why was it leaked? We can only speculate, of course, but...
surely it was purposely leaked.
Yes, there was a reason why it was leaked. And if it was leaked by Russians, which I think is fairly likely, one of the reasons was that Russians were not getting as far as they wanted to, or they wanted to expose divisions in the US administration, or either of those things. So we also should, I think, take into account this broader context.
At this point, Lisa, I want to talk to you again as a Kyiv parliamentarian. The sticking point in all of this, surely, is the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from parts of Donetsk province that they currently control. I mean, giving up such territory after such a bloody war with high losses, that would be untenable for Ukrainians, would it not?
Yes, of course, that's hard, but I believe we would be ready to negotiate this part if we had security guarantees and if we had no so-called legalization of the territory under Russian control now, because now this is what Russia wants. They want everyone to recognize that this territory belongs to Russia, and this is an absolute red line that cannot happen. What is possible from our side is that we leave things as they are now at the front line zone and the line. It's going to be very hard, morally, very hard to explain to Ukrainian people why we end war now, why there is no justice. But maybe for the sake of the ceasefire and at least some time without war, it was trying doing it. But if you ask me what is my opinion on prospects of such a peace, I'm very pessimistic. And we've talked already today that historically Russia is imperialistic country, and they were committing lots of crimes, and Ukraine is a victim. Russia, for instance, in 20th century was doing waves of deportation of different nationalities, including from the territory of Ukraine, Crimea, Crimean Tatars, waves of deportation. Did they ever pay the price? Did they ever pay the price for Holodomor, for Ukrainian famine, when millions of people were dying from hunger in Ukraine? And the truth of these crimes actually came out only after years and years, and Russia keeps committing crimes again and again by deporting Ukrainian children, by deporting civilians, by organizing so-called filtration camps, which is in real fact is a concentration camp. This is all possible when Russia is doing business. And what is very dramatic and tragic is that it doesn't look as United States understand that it's not possible to make a kind of business deal with Russia if they don't pay a price for that crimes, or otherwise it will all continue and continue, even if there would be a short or longer break during all of that, which of course for me as Ukrainian, I was born in independent Ukraine. I always believed that our generation will live in a happy European country that we're shaping. I don't want Russia to commit more and more crimes, but I also want justice, and justice is not something we can give up.
Very strong words there, Lisa. Mariana, I want to come back to this peace plan. It's very hard to keep track of President Trump. I mean, one moment he's saying this deal needs to be signed off by Thursday. The next he's attacking Volodymyr Zelensky, saying if Ukraine doesn't accept the plan, they're on their own. And now he's sounding cautiously optimistic. I mean, who do you think is really running the show in regards to these talks?
It's hard to tell, Annette. Really, as you said, President Trump has been kind of swinging back and forth on these issues, first putting pressure on Ukraine, then imposing sanctions on Russia. Clearly, we know that Witkoff and possibly J.D. Vance have been involved in these back channels, preparing engaging with Dmitriev, or who else might have engaged on the Russian side to draft these 28 points. We know that Marco Rubio, this Secretary of State, has been left out of the process. He did brief the senators in a phone call, calling it very unambiguously a Russian wish list. That's his words, right? So none of this is particularly surprising, given how this administration has done business, normally through people who are loyal to the president himself, who are within his immediate surrounding, whether they have an official mandate or not, to do this kind of negotiations. But again, it seems to be still very transactional on the U.S. part, right? President Trump wants to have this war ended. He wants to have a peace deal that he can pin, as another medal to his coat and claim victory. But this has proven to be a lot harder than he had anticipated, and he said that much before. And again, I think his strategy is from time to time to create the sense of urgency. So now this is another round of kind of trying to rally the parties to the negotiating table and see that whether through like sheer push you can get something through the finish line. Again, this speed has a cost, right? The cost is that you will push the parties to the wrong and unsustainable deal, and then down the line you have to pay the price for the deal that breaks down, that's unsustainable.
Christine, with that in mind, according to Reuters, an alternative European plan has removed the point from original proposals on Ukraine being barred from NATO. It's also removed any reference to Ukraine ceding land to Moscow, saying instead the issue of territory should be resolved by further talks. Do you think there's any wiggle room on the part of Washington to hear what Europe has to say?
It's always the same. And if you are looking to the Russian reactions, they say that the European proposals are not constructive. So basically, the position is quite clear. Russia proposed a reasonable peace plan, and Europeans are unreasonable. So it's, in a way, it's the fault of Ukrainian and European if ever you've got no peace in Ukraine. Basically, it's the narrative of Russia, and it's not a surprise. But just to add something to what Lisa was saying about the way that Russia is making deals and is managing things. There is something that is very real and that I think we've got to keep in mind. If ever you have any temptation to believe the Russian sweet words, if they can do sweet words, something which is real, it is the increase of the sabotage attacks that have been launched on the European Union countries' territories. And we've got an increase that doubles, that triple in a way. And it's not only toward infrastructures, it's also attack against individuals, against people, meaning that we've got a country who is saying, okay, we are looking for peace, but we are launching attack on your infrastructures, on your own territories, and against people in order, and they even go to they even are not going back any foot forward when we're talking about assassination. Just remember Kuzimov in Spain. Just remember Volkov in Lithuania. He wasn't dead, but he was like aggressed. We've also had attack on the on one minister of Estonian government. So they are pushing the attacks. They are pushing the pressure. It is the way that Russia is doing deals. And I think that we've got to keep that in mind. And it's not mentioning the informational machine that they are pushing and that they are leading. And it's quite funny because they are making their own fuel with everything. Recently, they are even using the manosphere vocabulary. So reusing this kind of soya boys in order to try to divide militaries in between them. Do you really want, you who are militaries, you are strong, you are very manly, do you want to follow a soya boy? So, I mean, let's be clear on that. They are pushing a lot of kind of warfare, and even towards European countries, that's the countries that we are dealing with. So we've got to be very careful on the way that they are dealing negotiations.
Andre, the Coalition of the Willing, a group of countries which aims to support Ukraine and inevitably increase pressure on Moscow, is holding a meeting tomorrow. So far, only I understand the UK and France have said that publicly that they would provide a reassurance force in the event of a ceasefire. But of course, both of these nations are NATO members. And Moscow would inevitably veto that in any case. What are you expecting to come out of this meeting tomorrow?
Well, I think at the moment it's key from European perspective that the diplomatic process is geared toward a conclusion that is not opposed to this idea of, sustainable ceasefire and just peace down the road. So I think this is the key task at the moment. I think for the EU, what comes next, a big decision on the reconstruction loan in December. There are many voices, there have been many voices saying, the EU has been hapless, has been left, in the antechamber. I think what is the yardstick? Of course, the EU doesn't have the hard power to determine the terms of the peace, but it's been supporting Ukraine quite heavily. I mean, many things could have been done sooner, more could be done, of course, but I think this reconstruction loan that will be debated by the European Council in December has the potential, at least, to be a real game changer if it's conceived in this way, and of course, if a consensus is maintained. And now I think it can go either way. What we see, of course, the original 28-point plan also addressed the issue of frozen assets, not necessarily in line with what the Europeans' plans about using those assets for Ukraine are. So either we will see sort of a push to actually get this plan through, or we can also see sort of a more dissent, and it's a very fragile, very fragile scheme at the moment.
Lisa, as Andre just mentioned there's the issue of who actually gets those frozen Russian assets, and the Financial Times, again, as others have been reporting, that Washington would take $100 billion for a US-Ukraine investment vehicle, which would deliver half its profits to the US, with Europe adding supposedly another $100 billion, and the rest would go to a joint Washington-Moscow investment venture. I'm curious to know, Lisa, how would this go down in Kyiv?
Well, just listening that there will be Moscow-Washington venture with that funds that are from frozen assets, I think it's an absolute insanity. I do understand the mindset of American president who thinks in this way, that it's important to have revenues and benefits, and that actually is quite honest. So we should even be grateful that it's that straightforward, honest. But again, I want to bring the question of justice. Today I was at the Congress of local authorities in Ukraine, and that especially mayors and the head of communities of occupied territories, deoccupied, and all of them actually were asking questions about these frozen assets and compensation mechanism and reparation loans and frozen assets, whether there is any light in the end of the tunnel that normal people will receive any kind of compensation. They lost homes, they lost lives, they lost everything they had. People in Mariupol, we don't know the numbers, but at least 26,000 people were killed in one Mariupol. Can you imagine how many tragic losses we have? And of course, these frozen assets should be used for justice and also for Ukraine recovery. If this can be somehow negotiated, that there'll be new funds created with these funds, this is absolutely fine, but not together with the aggressor. This is nonsense.
Lisa, given that you are in Kyiv, I'm very curious to know, at the moment, President Zelensky is facing an onslaught of corruption allegations. Given what has transpired with these peace plan and these Geneva talks, has it unified the population as a result? And if there were elections, as part of this so-called peace plan talks about, do you think President Zelensky would win?
We have a saying for a couple of years already here in Ukraine that first we need to end war, and then we will deal with everything else, and we'll be demanding answers to all these big questions about internal situation. Because unfortunately, yes, we do have quite a difficult situation politically inside the country, but I think majority of people also understand that now the main question is to defend Ukraine interests in these talks that are happening now in Switzerland or in other platforms. But I'm sure that Ukrainian people will not forget the scandals that were happening a week ago. And I was present at the meeting with the President Zelensky, and my impression was that he understands that people demand answers, including our party, including parliament, so he cannot really postpone making decisions because he believes that there is a great responsibility that comes now in the international arena, everything that concerns the end of the war. This is very hard responsibility for him, but he has to carry it. And there is another internal responsibility. And I really hope that Ukrainian society will stay strong, because if to be very honest, in the circumstances that we live now, without water, without electricity, with all these scandals, with many people dying every day, this is very hard reality. But I want to believe that with our resilience, we still have a lot of wisdom, but we will keep demanding justice also internally in our country. So we will not forget about all these scandals.
Mariana, if I could come back to you, and again, this is a lot about speculation because details are sort of lacking, but if we talk about security guarantees, there is talk of a so-called Article 5 guarantee, which in this case would be provided by the US and not NATO, if indeed Ukraine was attacked by Russia. What's the European stance on this? I mean, how much can they push back on this proposal?
Well, I mean, an Article 5 guarantee for Ukraine, even if it is just from the United States and not from NATO as an organization, would be, a very good deal, I suppose. But what is it that really, what kind of meaning is really imbued into this provision? I mean, normally an Article 5 guarantee or Article 5 type guarantee means that an attack against one is an attack against all. There's definitely a strong military and defense component to this guarantee, meaning that parties reserve the right to deploy troops should the other side should the guaranteed side be attacked. Right? Is the United States prepared to do that? Certainly, the provisions for no permanent stationing of NATO troops on the Ukrainian soil, that has been also part of the European counterproposal, right? No major permanent stationing of the troops in peacetime. Right? Does it mean then that if not NATO, that maybe US outside of NATO can have bases, military bases in Ukraine? That the devil here really is in the details. And let me just add a little bit to what Lisa had to say about the internal Ukrainian situation. I think what's going on in Ukraine today, and even earlier, if you recall, in July, the mass protest against the government's, or actually the parliament's bill to curb the independence of anti-corruption agencies that was walked back as a result of these protests. That underscores that President Zelensky has a very strong domestic constituency, many stakeholders outside of just the government and the parliament, but Ukrainian civil society and the public broadly that has been very much involved in all of this war effort and has stepped in where the government was found lacking, right? Through fundraising, through sending food to the front, clothing, everything, right? This is a major national war. And so whatever President Zelensky signs, wherever he signs it, in Geneva or elsewhere, he still has to bring that peace plan home and he has to sell it. And now his position after these revelations of corruption in the energy sector perpetrated by people very close to his office and to him personally, that is going to be even harder than possibly before. So I think there's a double pressure on Zelensky domestically and internationally to arrive at a good deal.
Andrei, your thoughts?
Yeah, just on the Article 5 type of guarantee, I think the potential problem with this is that most of what Mariana actually mentioned is only implied, right? If you read Article 5, it only says that the parties will take measures that they deem necessary. And what actually makes Article 5 so strong as a security guarantee is not just the writ of the Washington Treaty, it's the actual deployments, it's the contingency plans, and it's certain credibility that is built over time, and it's by no means sure that this would be actually part of the deal. And I still think, I mean, you mentioned the reassurance force before, so also in this context, I think the best security guarantee that we can help to build together, the US and Europeans, is a strong Ukraine and strong Ukrainian military that is capable to defend Ukraine now and deter potential future attacks in the future.
Christine.
Yeah, you were talking about the internal balance in Ukraine, but maybe it could be interesting under the control of Mariana to keep an eye of the US internal balance, because at now, and I think it's the first time since the second round of Trump presidency, but you've got some Republicans that are considered as hawks who push up a little and explaining that this kind of rush in having a peace plan is not a good way because it's giving too much to Russia. And it's like the old guards of Republicans who were raised in like the old times, who are inheritance of the Cold War. And if ever maybe the Trump administration has to deal with this kind of streams, that could be something that to keep in mind in order to keep the balance right.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for, and at this point I want to thank very much my guests. I would ask to thank, of course, Lisa Yasko from Ukraine, and a Ukrainian MP from Cambridge, Massachusetts, Mariana Bujarin from the Centre for Nuclear Security Policy. Here with me in the studio, Christine Degoin-Clement, a specialist on Eastern Europe, and André Dietrich, a senior analyst with the European Union Institute for Security Studies. If you want to find out more about the France 24 debate, you can, of course, head to france24.com. Until tomorrow evening, that's it for now. Thank you.